Hello people, welcome to Psieros.Psychic.Signs with me playing the role of Psieros. I just want to show you a little bit around my room for the moment before we get cracking on the video, which is all about the 2020s. Just want to show you some of the artworks and my big Ganesh thing, my cool Sonic the Hedgehog hat, and my Ganesh poster that I drew myself and then blew up to poster size. Another piece of artwork there. Yeah, and let's talk now. I'm just really pleased with how my room is turning out. It feels very me at the moment. I've got my, maybe I should be using my Psieros magic staff. Yeah. So, let's talk about the 2020s. No, let's put that down. That's silly. So, I have some theories about the 2020s. I don't even think they're theories, they're feelings. Just try to move the thing out of the way. They are feelings, and they're very strong feelings, actually. They're predictive feelings, right? So I have these feelings that are like they're just predicting how things are going to be in the 2020s. So here we go. Well, let's just start off by, I want to talk a bit about the preceding decade, the 2010s, and then lead into what I think is going to happen in the 2020s. Now, I'm not really seeing this from a major events point of view. I don't want to talk about it from world events and things that happen, but more like general feelings. I kind of feel the decades and see them in terms of their colour and their sense of value, or values even. But I want to be very vague, really, because I think that a decade, lots of stuff happens in a decade, and you have lots of different fashion styles, and you have lots of different world events, and you have lots of changes in culture and evolution of culture from one thing to the next, and shifting understandings, shifting priorities, shifting tastes, and so on. Right, and you have shifting fortunes as well in people's individual lives and in countries, nation states, and the world as a whole. And you have major events and minor events and stuff, and everything is always moving in directions and taking steps back and taking steps forward and things like that. So it's all kind of to summarize it. I would summarize it in feeling rather than in detail, if that makes sense. So, for example, the 1990s, as I look back at the culture and I look back at my memories, I have a sense of brightness, optimism, fun, newness, sanity, weirdness, excitement, a new openness as well. I was going to say clarity, but I don't really see clarity. I see there's a fuzziness to the 90s, a warm fuzziness. And then we come to the 2000s, and I think that the World Trade Center attack on 2001, September the 11th, that decade was sharply defined by that event. So I have the feeling of greyness, of darkness, of pavement feelings. It's very pavementy. The whole decade feels like a pavement feeling. Grey, concrete, smoke, dust, fear, terror, pain, but not like whoa craziness, but like undercurrent. It's an undercurrent of fear and pain, and this sense of reality, grief and reality, going on throughout that decade, the 2000s. Because remember, we came into the 2000s with the Y2K bug thing, that there was some palpable worry in the air about what does this Y2K thing mean, and is it going to do anything, and is the world going to end or what? There was a lot of that around. Whether you subscribed to it or not, it was in the air. And then you had this major event that actually happened a year later, or a year and a half or so later. So that's interesting, isn't it? And then so coming into the 2010s, this decade for me has been possibly the most boring. It's been the most boring, uneventful, decade in terms of the outer world. I just feel like the outer world has been completely uninteresting to me throughout the most part of this decade. You know, I mean, for my personal life has been through a lot of crap in the 2010s. Not to say that my personal life went through some shit in the 2000s, the noughties, but the 2010s has just been, to describe it, it would be murky, muddy, lots of bits and pieces, fractured, not knowingness, shifting sands and tides. So it's like very kind of blurry and unfocused, and like it's trying to move towards something. Basically, it's like there's lots of different parts that were going on in that decade, lots of small individual things that are trying to work out what they're all about, and none of them really hitting anything particularly strident. And then this is what I'm gonna, so that's where we're coming from, is what I feel. I mean, I feel like in the music industry and in the film industry, there was some good stuff here and there overall in this decade. But remember, we also had a load of celebrities die. 2016, I mean, even beginning like 2014, 2015, 2016 was major, 2017 still some more, and 2018 some more. And these are celebrities who I feel like a lot of them died fairly young as well. So there's a lot of gaps opening up in terms of, so like Prince and Alan Rickman and just loads. David Bowie, Robin Williams earlier on as well. And so there's lots of gaps of these major people who were really big in terms of influence in years gone by that are now not there anymore. And I feel like that's opening up some space, as tragic as it is. I mean, even in the rock industry, you know, with Chester Bennington and Chris Cornell, lots of major players just, they're gone, you know. So that's been really tough, and grief for me has been a major theme over the last year. Grief, old age, death, that type of stuff has been major themes in my personal relationships. So grief for personal relationships in terms of like losing relationships, not to death, but the same feeling, grief, loss, you know, all that kind of feeling has all been there in this decade, especially the latter half of this decade. And as I said, lots of different little parts. This latest decade feels like lots of different little parts of, they're trying to be something, trying to do something important, but nothing really knows what it's been about in this last decade. I think it's been a very vague decade. And I do feel like there's a split in the middle between the 2010s to 15, and then the 15 to 20 is very different. I feel like that anyway. I don't know about you. Like 15, at the 2015 point, it seems to be like a little snap or something. Like everything that was good from 2015, but up until 2015, just went vague, even more vague. Like it's getting mushy, very mushy for those last 3 years. and then okay, and so as we move forward, what I see coming in the 2020s. And I actually see it for the whole of the decade. This is just like a vision, an impression, a feeling of what I see coming. And this applies to the arts, the culture in general, the feeling. It's just the feeling of being in this next period of time. The feeling I get is one of renewed optimism, renewed enthusiasm, renewed vitality, renewed vibrancy, renewed direction. Richer understanding between people. I feel like lots of things have fractured. There are lots of more categories, so many more categories in this latest 5 years. So sexuality is multiplied into millions of categories. Mental health is categorized into many different, millions of different categories of mental health disorders. There's all kinds of new categories of person.
Then you tuned into SJU, and we said, okay, sure.
Oh my God, that's
Thursday
weird.
night, he had stepped down.
Very quick turn.
Yeah, I guess he saw the show.
Right. Sorry about that. Categories. All sorts of categories have been exploding in all sorts of different areas. And these are categories of human beings. So we've got even more categories of race identity as well, because of the intermingling of races and stuff. And just categories has been madness over this last 5 years. And then what I'm seeing in this next decade is this new richness, the new vibrancy, like a sense of colour returning where there was greyness and murkiness, a sense of coherency where there was fracturedness, a sense of direction where there was meandering stuff, a sense of renewal and rebirth where there was the death and the loss from the previous decade, right? So it's like I can almost feel the decade winding down, and it sounds strange, but it feels like the decade of the 2010s is starting to actually like lose its own momentum, and it feels quite dark at the moment. I've never actually seen the atmosphere in the air as though it was dark. It's really strange. Even when it's dark, I'm still aware that like there's a lightness somehow in the air. But at the moment, there's this feeling of this shadow everywhere, and I see the darkness in the air more than I see the actual like street lights. I feel the dark, which is weird. I've never felt the darkness in the air before, but I really feel this black darkness in the air. But that feels like, I'm hoping anyway, that is just a really deep darkness before a really bright dawn. And so my prediction is that the 2020s is going to be like a new 90s, okay? So some of the 90s was pretty whack and weird and odd. But what I feel like the 2020s is going to do is going to capitalize on or bring back the optimism, the newness, the openness, the kind of... there's a sense of something happy in the 90s. Even like the kind of mopey, emo type of stuff in terms of music. There was a sense of something... happy. It was a happy feeling. I don't think it was a completely real happiness. There's a sense of like this rose tinted feeling in the 90s. It sort of exists in a hazy bubble of perfume or something. The 90s it's like a kind of narcotic happiness, but a warm one nonetheless. Films like Pulp Fiction I think really typified the 90s, that feeling of being in a narcotic dream days of happiness. It's a happy feeling, it's a pleasurable feeling, but there's a sense of some reality missing from that. And I think that the reality component that we've come through with regard to that we've picked up from the 2000s with the terrorism and all the grief and pain and fear that was in there, and then this murky understanding that life is not always bright and life is not always dark. Life is a mess of light and dark. That's been happening in the 2010s, this kind of fractured bits and bobs of stuff, all in a kind of browny grey mess, green mess, right? That we kind of clarify. It's like going through all this stuff is clarifying our understanding of what's important to us, and we want to take the depth of this decade and the learnings of this decade, because this latest decade I feel has not really done anything, but it's sensed there's just been opening up of space, so that allows for this depth to be there. And then what's going to fill that space, I think, is this new vibrancy. I get a sense of purple being very strong in this decade. Maybe it's because Thanos has been around, I get a sense of purple, blue, brighter colours like red, yellow, that kind of feeling. Whereas things before were kind of grey and brown and dull and dark green. So I sense this more strident feeling happening in the 2020s. There's like this kind of this purple, blue, red, yellow, or gold kind of feeling. So it's very much directional, moving forward. It's happy, but it's got a reality to it as well. So it's different from the rose-colored or yellowy orangey feeling of the 90s, and it's more like it's a clarity of purpose in the 2020s, and that's it's a happiness that is based on a more clear understanding of reality. So it's not happiness based on some kind of suspended state or heightened emotionalized reality or this kind of narcotic daze. It's a happiness that's based on clarity. It's a happiness that's based on understanding, a happiness that's based on kind of this concrete, the grey concreteness. It's like a concrete understanding that has now been moved into happiness. So it's strong, it's clear, it's hard in that it has this directionality to it. So it's not only being happy, but it's purposeful. I feel like the 90s, the happiness from the 90s has a sense of it's hovering there, whereas this 2020s is more of a directional happiness. It's like moving forward and upwards and outwards. Now, don't ask me about the 2030s because I don't have any idea about that really. I got this weak understanding that there might be more orangey than before, but there's nothing major that I can see in there because I'm only really seeing this next part. But I feel like that same feeling is going to continue throughout the whole of the decade. So it's like going to be boom, 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 boom. You might think there's like moments where you might doubt that it's going to stay strong, but it's going to be all the way through, like a pulse, all the way through that decade. And I think that probably the 2030s is when that's going to start to sort of mellow out a little bit. I don't know. I mean, I feel like it even carries on a little bit into the 2030s. I had this theory a while ago that things move not in necessarily decades, but in 15-year chunks. So that you get a new phase, which will be a 5-year intro, a 5-year plateau, and then a 5-year, what's that thing? Diminuendo, going down. So, I don't know. So I think that maybe, but I don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that's just silliness. But I was trying to like categorize different years in terms of time periods. So like the noughties began with a bang, pretty much. Interesting how we all predicted that the end of the world was going to happen. Not we all did, but a lot of us predicted that the end of the world was going to happen in 2000, and then something quite world-changing happened in 2001. So we missed it by a year, but something big did happen. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, like, I'm only looking at this from a Western perspective, from my own perspective, sitting in my room in England, but this is just a feeling that I get from the atmosphere. So maybe this only will apply to people in England or in America. I don't know. Or perhaps it's just only personal to me. Maybe this is what my 2020s is going to be like. I know that, everyone has their own feeling in relation to the times around them. So some people's noughties might have been great. Some people's 2010s might have been great. But I feel like there's an overall movement of humanity that everyone has a little share in, so we have our personal understanding of life, and then we have a collective understanding of life, which is more of our deeper human, like common human understanding of life. So there you go. My prediction for the 2020s is that it's going to be more coherent, stronger, richer, more vibrant, more clarity of purpose. Did I say clarity of understanding between people? More sense of shared humanity, a little bit, but there's still going to be all these categories. So there's all these categories, but they're trying something about the categories is being integrated into our understanding that we are all just part of the human race, and that is so the understanding needs to go deeper than categories, and then have categories as something that happens over the top. So I think that we're a little bit obsessed with categories at the moment. And then you drop down into your shared humanity, and you can still have your categories, right? They are true, and they have an impact on a certain level, but we need to go deeper than that first before we can appreciate the categories. So I think we're just too obsessed with categories, and we're also very obsessed with technology still. And I think that the technology aspect is maturing. That's one of the other aspects of this, which I forgot to mention, which is we've had smart technology now for a while. The mobile phone craze is starting to mellow, so we're like, okay, yeah, it's still going on, and there's a lot of excitement around it still, but that it's just more integrated into our lives now. And I think that we're developing a maturity in how we relate to technology. Again, with the internet's been around for a while, and that's starting to mature as well. So I feel like that's going to play a role in this next decade, that the things are going to become more clear. I feel like the internet has been muddy for a while. We were really excited about it. No one really knew what to do when it came around, and we were all just kind of doing stupid stuff, and it was mainly just a giant porn factory, which it still is. I do like my porn. but I shouldn't have said that, because I lost my train of thought. Damn pornos. They're so tempting. Well, even the porno is going to be more rich. We need richer porno. We need porno that is based on a clear understanding of reality, because there's a lot of shit in the porn industry, as in like people being treated badly, false perceptions of the body being promoted, and hyper focus on genitalia, all this kind of stuff. And then there's loads of issues with the porn industry. So even that, I feel, will have a new change. There's something going to be, you're going to let go of some things and have a clarity around what this is. Okay, there you go. That's my prediction of feeling for the 2020s. I hope you like my room with all my different artworks in. So thanks for watching. You've been watching Psieros.Psychic.Signs, sharing the psychic signs for the 2020s. Bye.